Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Creepy Nights channel. Today we will descend far beneath the beautiful, glittering facade of Paris, not to see the tourist bones, but to find something much older, much darker, and horrifyingly hidden. We're talking about the whispers that cling to the humid air of the forgotten crypts, the cold, wet silence where light simply cannot reach. This is the story of the medieval black mass rituals and the secret society that called the underworld its sanctuary. Imagine yourself standing here now, at the edge of the known world, where the stone steps descend into eternal gloom. You can feel the air change. Right? It loses the scent of the city and gains the metallic tang of damp earth and something else. Something vaguely rotten, like lilies left too long on a tomb. This vast network of tunnels, once quarries, is a skeleton key to centuries of Parisian history, but the level we seek is a secret even to the keepers of the modern catacombs. Do you have the courage to step into that place where the condemned performed their unholy rites, because you might not survive the first night spent down there? Before we take that first chilling step together, I would be very happy if you don't mind taking a moment to like the video and subscribe to my channel. That helps me stay motivated to create even more videos. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what is the local time? I always love to see how far apart we are when we share these dark journeys. Now, relax, and let's begin this journey. You are here, now. Your flashlight beam cuts a weak, wavering circle through the crushing darkness. The official Paris catacombs hold 6 million souls, stacked neatly, an ordered monument to death. But beneath that, beneath the bones, are the ancient, unstable galleries. These tunnels were dug by miners hundreds of years ago, long before they became the city's mass grave. It is here, in the oldest arteries, that the cult operated. They weren't concerned with the dead, you see. They were concerned with the forbidden, with reversing the sanctity of the church above them. The initial history of the cult of the unjust hand is murky, like water pooling in a forgotten corner. It's not in the official texts. It lives only in scattered heresy records and the terrified confessions of those captured during the various moral purges of the late Middle Ages. They believed that divine justice was fundamentally flawed, that God favored the pure, and therefore the only way to gain true. Dark power was to align themselves with the spirits of the unjustly condemned, those who died innocent, or those whose suffering was deemed excessive. They sought to channel their rage. As you walk, the rough-hewn stone walls scrape your shoulder. You notice the moisture beating on your skin. It is silent, but this silence is heavy, not empty. It feels like the pause before a terrible scream. You hear it, don't you? That faint, rhythmic drip. Drip. Drip of water, counting down to something. You might smile nervously, a small, light joke to yourself. If I hear church bells ringing down here, I'm turning back, because that means the walls are thinner than I thought, or something worse is coming. The very architecture of these deeper tunnels is different. The tourist-friendly levels have high ceilings and are shored up with modern engineering. But here, the passageways are narrow, the ceilings low, forcing you to duck your head. The stone seems oilier, slicker, as if weeping perpetual sorrow. This is the true historical horror event of this section, the sheer, brutal labor of these medieval miners, digging blindly, some crushed instantly by collapses, their deaths unmarked and their bodies left where they fell. Their ghosts, some whisper, became the first congregation of the cult. We are looking for a specific non-mapped gallery, You remember the old maps we studied, the ones sketched not by surveyors, but by captured cult members trying to barter their lives. They all point toward an area known only as the Mirror of the Innocents. And that brings us to the first strange, mysterious detail of our descent. On one of the damp walls, just at chest height, you suddenly see it, a single, perfectly carved symbol. It's not a common demonic sigil. It looks like a crude, upside-down cross that has been fractured down the middle, with a single weeping eye drawn beneath it. It's small, almost mist, but your hand instinctively pulls back from touching the cold stone. This symbol wasn't drawn recently. The moisture and sediment have settled into its deep cuts, suggesting it has been here for centuries, patiently waiting for someone to find it, someone like you. This symbol is our signpost. We are close to the hidden gate. You take a slow, deliberate breath. Are you sure you want to go through? You stare at the upside-down, fractured cross, the strange, mysterious detail that marked our way. It's a silent promise that you are moving from the merely macabre into the truly unholy. The air is slightly cooler here, a breath from deeper down, a draft that seems to pull the light from your small lamp. You hesitate, tracing the symbol with your gaze, not your finger. You remember the dampness from the last section, but this feels colder, heavier. This is where the maps, those desperate drawings of the condemned, said the true descent began, the hidden gate. The gate, however, is not a grand, obvious archway. It is a secret, a betrayal of the stone itself. The medieval cult, living in fear of the church and the king's officers, would not have created something easily found. They needed a passage that looked like a natural collapse, or just another dead-end tunnel. You move slowly now, dragging your hand along the wall, feeling for any inconsistency in the rough texture. Every few steps, you shine your light up, checking the ceiling. Are you sure you don't feel a slight tremor above you? A tiny vibration that suggests the city is still alive, oblivious to the secrets you are about to disturb. You try to make a small sound, a cough perhaps, just to test the acoustics. The sound is immediately swallowed, deadened by the surrounding earth. It's unnerving. The silence here doesn't just lack sound, it seems to absorb it. You might whisper a nervous joke to yourself, a soft chuckle. Well, if anyone down here sneezes, I suppose no one will wish them well. Maybe that's the real horror of the underground. As you move, you focus on the floor. The ground we were just on was littered with loose rocks and sediment. But here, the dust seems to have been deliberately swept back a few feet from the wall. You crouch down, the beam of your light illuminating the subtle difference. And then you see it a line, nearly invisible, a seam running vertically down the wall and horizontally near the floor. It is a stone door, fitted perfectly, disguised as the native rock. It's a masterful piece of medieval masonry, a secret pocket in the earth. This leads us to the true historical horror event intertwined with this path. For centuries, the Parisian underground was not only a place of death, but a place of desperate escape. During the 14th century, when the Black Death would sweep through the city, the only way to avoid the overflowing charnel houses and the stench of death was to go beneath. Thieves, heretics, and the terrified poor used these tunnels to flee the streets. Many who entered were never seen again, not because they found freedom, but because the tunnels shifted, the air ran out, or they simply got hopelessly lost and became another forgotten burial. The chilling truth is that entire families sealed themselves into side galleries, hoping to wait out the plague, only to starve together, their self-made tomb collapsing silently years later. You run your hand along the seam of the door, searching for a mechanism. There's no handle, no latch, only a small, circular depression, barely the size of a fingertip, about waist high. You push against the wall, but it's solid. You push your finger into the depression. Nothing happens. Then, you notice the subtle pattern of scratch marks near the depression. The strange, mysterious detail that acts as the key. They aren't random. They form a small, almost undetectable spiral, as if someone had twisted their finger in that spot hundreds of times. You decide to try it. You insert your finger into the cold stone depression, and gently, slowly, you begin to turn your wrist clockwise. For a second, nothing. Then a grinding sound, slow and deafeningly loud, in the silence. Cree-ch. A mechanism, perfectly preserved, engages within the wall. The sound of metal on metal is so aggressive, so absolute, that you instinctively freeze. Did anyone hear that? Is anyone else down here? Listening to the door groan open. A gust of air hits your face, but it is not the cool air of a normal underground space. This air is stagnant, heavy, and carries a faint, sickly sweet aroma, like old incense mixed with dried blood and something indescribably metallic. The door, heavy beyond measure, shifts inward a fraction of an inch, revealing a sliver of deeper blackness. You can feel the gravity of the secret, waiting behind that sliver of space. You have to brace yourself against the opposite wall, leaning your shoulder into it, to push the enormous stone slab further open. It resists, as if the earth itself does not want you to pass. Push harder. The stone groans again, a sound that vibrates through your chest, a sound of ancient secrets being reluctantly exposed. Now, the gap is wide enough. You shine your light through. It reveals a narrow, downward-sloping flight of steps, much older and rougher than the tunnel you are standing in. The steps are worn concave in the center, not from the feet of casual visitors, but from the repeated single-file passage of a determined few. And below them only infinite, suffocating darkness. You notice a second, faint smell, something akin to burnt animal hair or sulfur, long dissipated but still detectable by the senses when you pause to breathe. This is where the rituals happened. This is the abyss. You stand at the threshold. This is the last point of retreat. Are you ready to trade the familiar dampness of the known tunnels for the consecrated gloom of the unjust hand? If you take this step, you are leaving the historical periphery and entering the core of the cult's forgotten temple. Remember what the confessions said. Once you hear the chanting, you cannot turn back. Let's hope we don't hear any chanting just yet. One step, the air rushes past your ears, a sudden, cold whisper that might just be the draft. Or maybe it's the greeting of the condemned spirits waiting for their service to begin. You are inside. You are now fully committed to the descent, on steps that feel more like carved earth than solid masonry. They are uneven, slick with centuries of condensation, and they slope sharply downward, pulling you forward into the absolute darkness. Every step you take is a commitment, a faint shh sound of your shoe on the wet stone, immediately absorbed by the cold air. remember the sulfurous scent from the doorway. It intensifies down here, mixing with a pungent, earthy smell, like a root cellar that has been sealed for 1,000 years. You cling to the rough wall for stability. Your light beam swings wildly, making the shadows dance like mocking figures. Or are they just shadows? You find yourself holding your breath, listening for anything other than your own ragged exhale. Do you dare look down to count the steps? Because you get the chilling sense that if you stop counting, the stairs might not end where you expect them to. You whisper a small joke to yourself. If I hear the sound of a lute playing classical music down here, I'm going to assume I've found a surprisingly well-preserved medieval tavern, not a death cult's lair. I prefer the tavern. When you finally reach the final, lowest step, a flat stone slab, you stop. The oppressive silence returns, heavier than before. Your light settles on the slab, and there it is, the alchemist's seal. This is the strange, mysterious detail that sets this deeper layer apart. It is not the simple, fractured cross from the entry, but a highly intricate design etched deeply into the stone. It's a perfect circle, bisected by a winding serpent. But instead of the serpent biting its own tail, its mouth is open, poised above a tiny, inverted heart. It's a symbol of transformation, but of a profane one, the changing of the human spirit through suffering and the reversal of natural order. This seal confirms we are in the heart of the unjust darkness cult. Their goal was to use the agony of the innocent, the unjustly condemned, as a catalyst. And this connects directly to the true historical horror event that haunted Paris in the 14th century, a time of famine, plague, and religious fervor. Records speak of a series of mysterious disappearances that authorities quickly dismissed as merely the work of common thieves or the chaos of the times. But one case, specifically documented in the secretive archives of the Châtelet fortress, stands out. In 1326, the body of a young apprentice, wrongly accused of petty theft just before his death, was found not buried, but placed deliberately within a sealed section of an abandoned well beneath the city. The most chilling detail. The body had been meticulously drained, and several internal organs were missing, but the official report insisted it was only desecration by animals. Cult confessions later revealed this was one of their earliest offerings, a ritual murder designed to transfer the unjust rage of the victim into a powerful essence. The cult believed the anger of the innocent held more power than any sacrifice of the guilty. You shiver, the cold, prickling fear rising on the back of your neck. You realize that you are standing exactly where that dark philosophy was practiced, where the seal was carved to consecrate the ground for these terrifying acts. You might feel a hand brush your ankle, a quick, cold touch. Don't worry, you tell yourself. It was probably just the draft. Probably. But the air is perfectly still now. You step off the slab and onto the floor of a small, rough-hewn chamber. It's not large, maybe 20 feet across, but the air is different, less humid, drier, as if the rituals performed here somehow baked the moisture out of the stone. Your light pans across the walls, which are covered not in natural rock fissures, but in repeated frantic carvings of the inverted heart and fractured cross. This was a place of preparation. And then you see the center. The climax of this section is unavoidable. Resting on a slightly raised section of the rock floor, which served as a natural platform, is a flat, crudely fashioned stone table, an altar. It is stained dark, deeply and uniformly, with residue that is dry and centuries old, but immediately recognizable. And right in the center of the altar, larger and more imposing than the one on the floor, is the alchemist's seal, It is surrounded by small, almost invisible scorch marks, suggesting something was ritually burned directly on top of the symbol. You take a step back, the sound of your shoe scraping the rock feeling like a gunshot in the silence. This is the undeniable, horrifying evidence. This small, forgotten chamber, miles beneath the bustling life of Paris, was a workshop of the darkest beliefs, a place where the unjust suffering of the world was harvested and consumed. The alchemist's seal here is not just an artistic design. It is a contract signed in blood and despair. You know you must move forward, deeper into the cult's territory, but your eyes are fixed on that central stain, a silent scream frozen in the ancient stone. You turn your back on the stained altar with the alchemist's seal, careful not to let your light linger too long on the ancient residue. The air in this chamber, though dry, feels thick with residual energy, like static electricity before a storm. You move toward a smaller opening on the far side, which looks like a natural fissure in the rock, barely wide enough for you to squeeze through. As you step through, the floor dips down again, and the atmosphere shifts drastically. This section is cold, intensely cold, a different kind of dampness, the biting cold of a deep cellar in winter. And here, in the oppressive silence, you begin to hear it, the whispers of the condemned. It's not a loud sound, not a scream, but a continuous, extremely faint sound, like wind blowing across tiny holes. If you lean in, focusing all your attention, it sounds like distant, ragged breath, or maybe 1,000 tiny voices sighing in unison. You stop dead in your tracks. Do you hear that it's so subtle? You can almost convince yourself it's your own blood rushing in your ears. But it has a rhythm, a horrible, slow tempo. The passage here is narrow and winding, a corkscrew path leading ever deeper. You are now crawling on your hands and knees in places, the cold stone leaching the warmth directly from your body. You might try to break the tension with a small, nervous joke. If I find a gift shop down here, I'm buying myself a souvenir. I deserve it after all this crawling. As you crawl, you brush against something hard tucked into a tiny crevice in the wall. You pull back your hand and shine your light on the object. This is the strange, mysterious detail that chills you to the core. It's a small, crudely carved talisman made of human bone. It's not a full bone, just a fragment, a piece of a finger or a toe joint smoothed, polished, and bored with a tiny hole, clearly designed to be worn on a thread. The cult members carried these. These were their tokens of faith, their connection to the unjust hand they worshipped. You leave it where it is. You certainly don't want to carry that energy with you. The whispers grow marginally louder here, echoing the profound, unsettling history of this city's underground. This brings us to the true historical horror event that made these tunnels a spiritual necessity for the cult. In the 18th century, the great Parisian cemeteries, especially the notorious charnel house of the Innocents, were overflowing. The soil was literally too shallow to accept new bodies. The decision was made to excavate millions of skeletal remains and transfer them into the old quarry tunnels below. This monumental, chaotic movement of the dead, sometimes done carelessly, sometimes disrespectfully, always in secret under the cover of night, created a massive spiritual vacuum. For the cult of the unjust hand, this was a golden age. They believed this mass. Haphazard dispossession of the deceased fueled their power, as millions of souls who had died without proper rest were scattered in the darkness. You realize you are walking through the periphery of that great transfer. But the ground you are on feels different, not random piles of bones, but intentionally sealed structures. Your light beam catches something ahead. The tunnel suddenly opens up into a round, natural cave, a space large enough to stand in. And there, against the far wall, is a chamber, not stacked high like the public catacombs, but carefully sealed. The entrance is a roughly mortared archway, clearly man-made, but the mortar itself is medieval, crumbling, and black with time. The climax arrives when you approach this sealed archway. The whispers are strongest here, emanating from behind the crumbling mortar. You crouch down and notice a small gap in the stonework, just big enough to peer through. You hold your breath, placing your eye close to the cold stone. The chamber inside is small and circular. It is a dedicated, forgotten burial chamber. But the bodies were not laid to rest. They were simply piled haphazardly, sealed away. You can make out the dark shapes of tangled skeletons, not millions, but perhaps dozens. Maybe cult members who were punished, or maybe unfortunate victims, all interred together. They were thrown in hastily, against all sacred custom. And then you see the chilling source of the whispers. Many of the skulls in the pile have been pierced, post-mortem, with small, crude iron spikes, placed strategically in the temples. The ancient wind, finding its way through the porous rock, is literally whistling through these holes, creating the faint, continuous, mournful sound. You hear the physical sigh of the condemned. You pull your eye away. The image burned into your mind. The sound is mechanical, but the intent was pure, ancient malice. This chamber wasn't a burial. It was a noise machine, a permanent soundscape of agony designed to power the rituals performed just above it. You quickly back away, realizing that the further you go, the more active and deliberate the cult's darkness becomes. You retreat from the chilling sight and sound of the spiked burial chamber, the whispers following you like cold static on the air. You move quickly now, not running, but urging yourself forward along a straight, narrow gallery. The tunnels are leveling out, suggesting you have reached the deepest, most stable stratum of the ancient workings. And then, the tunnel ends abruptly, opening into a space so vast that your little light beam is swallowed whole. This is the underground chapel, the sanctuary of the unjust hand. It's huge, cathedral-like in its proportions, a natural cavern carved larger by hundreds of hands over decades. The acoustics are unsettling. The silence here is not the dead, absorbing silence of the narrow passages, but a hollow, echoing silence that seems to magnify the slightest sound, like your own hesitant breath. Do you feel it? The pressure of this enormous, unseen space, the crushing weight of the thousands of dark thoughts and rituals that have stained these walls. You instinctively lower your voice, even though you are completely alone. This is where the unseen congregation met. Imagine the scene: scores of figures, shrouded, kneeling, the only light source being crude tallow candles whose smoke rose to stain the high, black ceiling. They were here to perform the Black Mass, the deliberate inversion of the sacred. You walk toward the center, your feet crunching on the dusty floor. It's impossible not to look over your shoulder every few steps. If you felt a cold breath on your neck, you might try to reason it's just the air shifting in this massive space, not the spirit of a disgruntled medieval worshiper. Wait, there is no air conditioning down here. As your light traces the rough walls, you find the strange, mysterious detail of this congregation hall. Running along the perimeter, carved into the stone at shoulder height, is a series of small, perfectly round, hollowed-out recesses. Each recess contains a tiny, sharp shard of black, obsidian-like glass. They are spaced irregularly, but clearly intentional. These were the cult's mirrors, not for reflection, but for absorption. They believed that when the congregation watched the ritual through these dark lenses, the inverted power was focused and drawn into them, shielding them from divine observation. It's a terrifying physical manifestation of their philosophical inversion. This clandestine gathering links to the true historical horror event of secret societies during times of profound religious conflict. Think of the intense pressure exerted by the Catholic Church and the Parliament of Paris against heresy and dark magic in the late medieval era. Historical records are full of trials for sorcery and diabolism, many of which were fabricated. But the very existence of such intense persecution forced real, dark cults underground. One historical record speaks of a small group of nobles and disgraced clergy who were secretly executed in 1461 for offenses against the Holy Sacrament. But the official charges masked something far more organized and elaborate, a society dedicated to desecrating the symbols of the Church. The large scale of this chapel suggests the cult was not just 3 or 4 people. It was an organization with wealth, connections, and deep, dark ambition, operating right under the noses of the king. Now, we come to a point that still causes confusing academic debate. Look at the acoustics. If you clap once, the sound does not echo naturally. It seems to distort, almost shifting pitch before fading. This suggests the shape of the cavern, or perhaps the placement of the pillars and dark glass mirrors, was intentional. The debate is this: did the cult merely find this cavern and use its natural resonance? Or did they deliberately engineer the space to acoustically enhance the hypnotic, slow chanting of their black masses, turning the very structure into a psychological weapon? No one knows why the geometry of the pillars seems to pull the sound inward, creating a dizzying, internal effect rather than a simple echo. It's a structure built for disorientation. Finally, your light reaches the far end. The climax of this part reveals the central focus of the entire room. There is no traditional pulpit or crucifix. Instead, on a raised dais, stands a single, roughly carved idol. It is not a demon, but a figure of a human being, tall, gaunt, its face turned perpetually down, and its hands bound tightly behind its back by thick, sculpted chains. It represents the ultimate unjust victim, the source of their power. At its feet rests a deep, circular basin, clearly intended to collect offerings. You stop, standing in the exact spot where the cult's high priest would have presided. The silence wraps around you, but you can feel the phantom pressure of the unseen congregation kneeling on the cold floor around you, their eyes dark and vacant, watching the idol, waiting for the Mass to begin. You realize you are standing in the center of their spiritual heart, and the cold air you feel is the perpetual, unjust sorrow they sought to capture. You stand mesmerized by the silent idol, the perpetual victim chained on the dais. But you know that the heart of this cult is not in the stone figures they worshipped, but in the forbidden philosophy they transcribed. We need to find the text. If this was their central chapel, their black cathedral, the most important documents would be hidden here, protected from discovery by the king's men. You begin to move along the curved wall, your light sweeping past the empty recesses. Those dark glass eyes we found in the last section, the ones the unseen congregation used to focus the power. Remember the alchemist's seal from the lower steps. That was the contract. The text we seek is the detailed terms of that contract. The floor is dusted, silent, but as you walk, you notice a low row of stone blocks running along the wall, clearly designed to be used as seating or pews for the kneeling worshipers. You run your hand over the cold, rough stone. Most of the blocks are solid, immovable, but then you feel a small, almost imperceptible shift in the stone beneath your fingers. A section is hollow. You crouch down, the weight of the air pressing down on you. You realize this is the strange, mysterious detail we were looking for. The top of the pew block is actually a lid, designed to pivot inward, and where the lid meets the main body of the stone, the cult had sealed the seam with a substance that is no longer mortar. It is dry, brittle, and black, possessing a disturbing, almost papery texture. It looks horribly like dried, blackened human skin, stretched taut and used as an organic sealant against the dampness and the gaze of the world. You hesitate. Breaking this seal feels like disturbing a tomb, not just opening a box. Do you dare touch it? You use the edge of a small tool to carefully pry the lid. The seal cracks with a sound like dry bone snapping, a sharp, unexpected tink. The stench that emerges is immediate and shocking, not the damp, earthy smell, but a strong, musty aroma of ancient parchment, pressed herbs, and something bitter, like burnt oil. The lid gives way, and you shine your light into the hollowed-out cavity. Inside, wrapped in thick, protective layers of woven hemp cloth, is a single object, the forbidden text. The fear of written heresy in medieval France, which is the true historical horror event linked here, was immense. The church believed that spoken words could be confessed and forgiven, but a written text, especially one that inverted divine law, was eternal damnation made tangible. Entire libraries were burned, not just for content, but to eradicate the very idea of knowledge outside ecclesiastical control. The cult knew this. This text was more valuable and more dangerous than any of their physical relics. You carefully lift the heavy cloth bundle. The text itself is bound in thick, scarred leather. It feels impossibly cold in your hands, radiating a strange, heavy inertia. You can't help but whisper a small, nervous joke to yourself. I hope this doesn't come with a subscription fee. It looks expensive to maintain. You gently unwrap the binding cloth. The book is revealed, its pages stained a deep sepia tone, covered in cramped, meticulously careful Latin script. You flip it open to the first page. The parchment is so old it feels brittle, like thin sheets of ice. The climax arrives as you read the title, scribed in large, florid Gothic lettering at the top of the first page. It is not called a Bible or a Gospel. It is titled simply Liber Iustitiae Inverse, the Book of Inverted Justice. You turn a few pages, scanning the dense text by the weak beam of your light. It's filled with chilling passages detailing the precise methodology for performing the Black Mass, including specific, profane prayers and rituals designed to call upon the unjust dead. One diagram catches your eye, a complex astronomical chart mapping the celestial conjunctions most favorable for invoking the spirit of betrayal. This explains why the cult's activities were so difficult to track. They weren't random. They were timed perfectly to forgotten dark calendars. You close the book, the metallic, dry smell of the parchment clinging to your hands. This isn't just a record of their history. It's a living instructional manual for true, absolute inversion. You now hold the entire codified philosophy of the unjust hand. You need to keep moving, but the simple weight of the text in your hand feels like a heavy chain, linking you directly to the condemned spirits whose whispers still faintly echo from the sealed burial chamber behind you. You know that finding the chalice, the subject of the next part, will be made easier now that you understand the very core of their unholy doctrine. You carefully tuck the heavy Liber Justitiae Inversi, the Book of Inverted Justice, back into its protective wrapping and set it gently on the stone pew. You can feel its dark gravity, the silent promise of forbidden knowledge. Now that we understand why they gathered here, we must look at how they consecrated this vast chapel. As you move away from the altar dais and deeper into the side galleries of the cavern, you begin to notice the construction, the shoring up of the rock. But instead of standard masonry, the cult used what they had in abundance: bones. This is where the truth gets deeply confusing and disturbing. You are walking through rows of tightly stacked human remains, not the neat, artistic displays of the public catacombs, but crude, functional walls of femurs and skulls, tightly packed with mortar. These are the infamous bones of the innocent Peels mentioned in the fragmented cult confessions. This brings us directly to the confusing academic debate that still splits historians and archaeologists studying the underground networks. The question is, were these bone piles merely structural supports or macabre, intentional ritual components? One camp argues these were purely utilitarian. During the Great Bone Transfers, millions of bones were dumped into the abandoned quarries, the true historical horror event. It makes simple engineering sense to use readily available material, the bones mixed with local clay, to stabilize the dangerously crumbling ceilings. They believe the cult simply appropriated an existing grim structure for their meeting place. But the other camp, the ones who study the unjust darkness philosophy we just read about, points to a crucial, chilling detail. You lean in now, shining your light on a section of the wall. Do you see it? This is the strange, mysterious detail that fuels the entire debate. Look closely at the surface of the skulls and long bones in this pile, particularly those facing outward. They are not merely stacked. Many have been intentionally and meticulously etched with tiny, almost invisible symbols, not the alchemist's seal, but minute, geometric scratch marks. They look like a forgotten language. These markings were clearly added before the bones were stacked. This defies the structural argument. Why would medieval laborers take the time to delicately etch bones before using them as crude mortar? The cult's philosophy, the unjust darkness, demanded that the spirits of the innocent, condemned, be contained and harnessed. The debate centers on the idea that these bone piles were not walls, but spiritual batteries. The marked bones, they theorize, were specific victims, perhaps those who died in prison without confession, or children who died unbaptized, whose unjust fate was considered particularly potent. The etched symbols were thought to be containment spells, ensuring the spirit's rage stayed bound within the bone structure, creating a perpetual, charged atmosphere for the black mass. If you felt a slight dizziness, a cold, prickling fear that never quite goes away, it might be the effect of this sustained, centuries-old spiritual containment field. You might pause here and try to inject a little morbid humor to check your nerves. I wonder if these bones are judging our choice of footwear. I should have worn something quieter. Apologies. Ancient and unjustly condemned friends. The academic confusion deepens when you notice the acoustic properties we discussed in the last section. If the bones were etched and stacked specifically to contain and broadcast spiritual energy, it suggests the cult possessed a terrifyingly advanced understanding of occult acoustics and spiritual mechanics. The arrangement turns the whole structure into a massive amplifier for negative energy. The climax of this section arrives as you step around a low-hanging archway and see the largest, most organized bone pile yet. It forms a kind of low, circular barrier around a small, central space. As you examine the skulls here, you notice the marks are not mere scratches, but full, detailed inversions of standard medieval religious iconography. You pull out the memory of the Liber Iustitiae in verse. You remember the chapter titled The Walls of Weeping. The text explicitly states that the most potent rituals require the altar to be surrounded by the cranium of the bound, bones ritually marked to trap the fury of the dispossessed. This bone pile, this terrifying structure, was not built by chance. It was built by design. It is proof that the cult was not just meeting in the darkness. They were building their own theological world, a dark mirror of the city above, using the bodies of the forgotten as their very foundations. This is the truth that the official records desperately tried to hide. You are now standing within the confines of their spiritual prison. You move past the menacing, silent walls of the bones of the innocent, those bone piles that served as structural support and spiritual battery, as we learned in the last section. The weight of all that contained. Unjust fury feels like physical pressure on your chest. You are now moving into the innermost recess of the chapel, a smaller, darker nook behind the main altar dais, meant only for the high priest and the most sacred objects. The cold here is different again. It is not the damp cold of the earth, but a profound, artificial coldness, like air drawn directly from a freezer. This area was clearly sealed off or perpetually chilled to preserve something. You find a small, carved niche in the stone, perfectly sized, about chest height. Your light beam falls directly onto the object resting within. This is the central focus of the entire black mass, the black chalice. It is not what you might expect. There is no glittering gold or silver. Instead, it is the strange, mysterious detail that confirms its sinister use. The chalice is carved crudely from a single piece of dense, fossilized wood, almost black, and polished smooth by centuries of handling. It is squat, wide, and shallow, more a dish than a cup. Around its brim, the cult meticulously carved the symbol of the inverted heart, repeated 12 times, one for each apostle reversed. The entire artifact is coated with a sticky, dark lacquer that smells faintly metallic. Even now, this chalice was the vessel for their ultimate act of profanity. This ties back to the true historical horror event that made possessing such an item a death sentence in medieval Europe. Profaning the Eucharist. The consecrated bread and wine was considered one of the most heinous crimes against the Church, often punishable by being burned alive. The penalty was so extreme precisely because the object was believed to contain the very essence of Christ. Therefore, the cult's chalice was the ultimate target of inversion. According to the Liber Iustitiae Inversi, the forbidden text we found, the Black Mass, required the priest to consecrate a profane substance in this chalice, usually a mixture of graveyard dirt, nightshade, and the bitter wine of regret, representing the ultimate reversal of the holy act. The purpose was to draw down the essence of the unjust darkness and infuse the congregation with the boundless rage of the betrayed. As you stare at the dark object, you feel a visceral revulsion. It is an object designed only to hold things that should never be held. A container of pure philosophical poison. You might offer a hushed, nervous joke to yourself. I think I'll skip the communion wafer tonight. This place looks like they failed the health inspection about 600 years ago. You realize the chalice is not simply sitting in the niche. It is resting on a bed of fine, chalky white powder. As you carefully tilt your light, you see that the powder is actually very, very fine bone ash, the residue of a ritualistic burning, perhaps of a consecrated object stolen from a church above. The chalice, therefore, is perpetually sitting on a throne of desecration. Do you dare reach out and feel the surface? If you do, the wood feels unnaturally cold, heavy, and oily, as if it perpetually sweats the moisture from the rock around it. You instantly pull your hand back. The climax of this section is the realization of the chalice's most terrifying function. You notice the base of the chalice has a hidden spout, a small, barely noticeable hole covered by the dark lacquer. This wasn't just a cup for the ritual, it was a mechanism. The confessions mention that after the consecration of the night, the chalice was emptied into the drainage channel that led directly to the roots of the city above. The cult believed that by draining their inverted, profane blood into the very foundation of Paris, they were ritually cursing the city, poisoning its spiritual ground, ensuring that the unjust darkness would always have a hold on the populace. This artifact is not merely a relic of a forgotten service. It is a spiritual weapon, carefully preserved by the cold, deep stillness of the earth. You look around the small niche again, checking the shadows that seem to press tighter than usual. The feeling of the cold, prickling fear intensifies, a silent warning that you are now closer than ever to the dark. Beating heart of the cult's purpose. We have found the vessel. Now we must discover who controlled it. You step back from the niche holding the black chalice, the unholy vessel that contaminated the spiritual roots of Paris. You feel the need to move away from that contained malevolence, turning now toward a smaller, alcove-like structure off the main chapel floor. This area feels different, less for ritual, more for administration, or perhaps interrogation. As you approach, the air carries a fleeting scent that momentarily cuts through the ancient dampness fear. This nook seems to hold the echoes of betrayal, a story of human desperation and ruthless exposure that is crucial to understanding how the cult survived. This is the small story of Brother Thomas. Thomas was a young, zealous Dominican friar assigned by the Bishop of Paris in the late 14th century to infiltrate the rumors of the Unjust Hand cult. The true historical horror event that set this up was the sheer paranoia surrounding heresy during this period. The methods of the Inquisition were brutal, but so were the counter-methods of the dark societies they hunted. They had spies who watched the spies. The cult knew they needed absolute secrecy, and any attempt at infiltration was met with a terrifying, absolute finality. Brother Thomas was brilliant. He used his knowledge of arcane texts and his genuine outrage over unjust darkness to pose as a disillusioned scholar seeking a truer path to power. He gained their trust over months, memorizing the chants and even, terrifyingly, participating in a lower-level ceremony near the stacks of the bones of the innocent we saw earlier. His goal was simple: to locate the alchemist's seal, find the forbidden texts, and bring back proof of their profanity to the church. He almost succeeded. On a night when the unseen congregation was smaller, Thomas managed to slip away from the main group. He searched the area behind the altar, looking for the very book we found in Part 6, the Liber Justitiae Inverse. But the cult's high priest, a man named Foucault, we'll speak more of him later, was unnaturally perceptive. He smelled the scent of holiness on Thomas the Faint, lingering aroma of consecrated oils that his disguise couldn't wash away. Thomas was apprehended right here, in this small chose-qu'on nook. You shine your light around. The walls are smooth, but near the floor, the stone is slightly discolored, darker, as if something was aggressively cleaned up here centuries ago. You might think aloud, do you think the air down here tastes like old secrets and even older fear? I certainly do. The climax of Thomas's story, and the climax of this section, is horrifying. Foucault, instead of killing him immediately, decided to use him as a testament to the cult's power over light and life. He didn't use a knife, he used the stone itself. Foucault commanded the strongest members to pin Thomas against the wall. Then, slowly, methodically, they crushed his hand, the hand that held his secret cross, the hand that would have carried the proof back to the church against the rough rock. And here is the strange, mysterious detail that remains. You crouch down and look closely at the wall where the dark discoloration is deepest. You see a shallow, yet unmistakable indentation, a human handprint pressed into the rock by unimaginable force. And right in the center of where the palm would have rested, glints a tiny, rusted shard of metal. It is not native to the rock. It is a fragment of a crucifix that Thomas must have held tight, hidden in his palm, until the pressure pulverized the metal and embedded it forever into the stone wall. That tiny shard of cross, fused with the rock of the cult's sanctuary, is the final, agonizing echo of his failure and the cult's absolute ruthlessness. His sacrifice bought us this knowledge, but it cost him his life, and his screams, they say, were absorbed by the very bone walls surrounding the chapel. The cult then left his body here for a week, a silent, chilling message to anyone else who harbored thoughts of betrayal. No one dared infiltrate them again for decades. You stand up quickly, the cold, prickling fear now sharp and intense. You realize the cult wasn't just dedicated to ritual. They were a tightly knit, murderous organization dedicated to self-preservation. Their ruthlessness is the only reason these secrets survived. You walk quickly away from the spot where the unfortunate brother Thomas met his agonizing end, leaving the embedded shard of the crucifix behind. That small story of betrayal and brutality confirms that the unjust hand was not just a collection of confused heretics. It was a deeply organized power structure. Now, we must turn our attention to the architects of this darkness, the unholy trinity. The cult was ruled by three people, a deliberate, blasphemous inversion of the holy structure. They provided the philosophy, the protection, and the ritual fire that kept the darkness alive. You are now in a slightly wider side passage, a kind of internal meeting room adjacent to the main chapel. Here, the stone walls are carved with three distinct symbols, repeated over and over, marking the domain of the leadership. The first was the high priest, Foucault. He was the voice, the executioner, and the philosophical anchor of the cult. He was a disgraced scholar, brilliant but filled with venomous cynicism, believing that God's justice was a cosmic joke. He wrote the central tenets of the Liber Justitiae Inversae, the forbidden book we found earlier. His symbol is a burning skull with a fractured jaw, representing the silent, unjust condemnation that fueled the cult. He was the one who personally oversaw the fate of Brother Thomas, demonstrating his terrifying commitment to the cult's survival above all else. He was pure, dark ideology made flesh. The second leader was the alchemist, Dante. He was the physical manifestation of their profane science. He didn't care for sermons, he cared for power. Dante was responsible for the physical reality of the rituals, the poisons, the ritual components, the careful creation of the black chalice. He designed the intricate alchemist's seal to contain and control the spirits of the condemned, ensuring the energy was captured in the bone walls we examined. His symbol is a coiled serpent encircling an inverted heart, a perfect representation of his quest to transform sorrow into strength. He was the master of secrets, a dark medieval engineer, ensuring the physical safety and the spiritual potency of this entire underground complex. And the third, and perhaps most vital, was the patron, an anonymous countess referred to only as La Main Noire, the Black Hand in the texts. She never entered the inner sanctum, preferring to use the power from a distance. Her role was the true historical horror event that guaranteed the cult's longevity. She used her position within the Parisian aristocracy to provide funds, recruit disillusioned or cruel nobles, and most critically, to provide political cover. Whenever authorities came close to discovering the tunnels or catching a member, the Countess used her vast influence to redirect investigations, bury evidence, and ensure that any official discovery was dismissed as mere myth or petty crime. Her existence explains how a massive heresy could operate for so long right under the shadow of Notre Dame. This triad's ruthless organization is a chilling foreshadowing of later historical conspiracies involving the Parisian elite, where high-ranking nobles used poison and dark magic like the notorious Affair of the Poisons in the 17th century to settle political scores and gain influence. The unjust hand was the medieval root of this pervasive, lethal, aristocratic darkness. As you walk, your light falls upon the strange, mysterious detail that was once the central meeting point of this unholy leadership. It's a massive, cubic block of iron, cemented into the very bedrock of the tunnel floor. Too heavy to ever move, it's an iron cache. Etched into its surface are the three interlocking symbols: Foucault's burning skull, Dante's coiled serpent, and the Countess's discreet, aristocratic fleur-de-lis inverted and fractured. The chest is locked with three separate, intricate mechanisms, demanding all three keys for access. You might pause and offer a quiet, slightly dark joke to ease the tension. Do you think they had a suggestion box for the ritual chants? Because I'm sure someone would have suggested a song and dance number just to lighten the mood. This chest was the vault of their most sensitive secrets, their ledger of members, their blackmail material against the nobility, and the keys to their escape tunnels. It's empty now, cleared centuries ago when the cult finally disbanded or fled. But its very presence, guarded by the three seals, screams of the absolute power they wielded. The climax of this section is the terrifying realization of the synergy between them. Foucault provided the faith, the unholy justification. Dante provided the force, the tangible, poisonous power. And the Countess provided the freedom, the curtain of secrecy from the world above. Alone, they were dangerous. Together, their combined power made the unjust hand an unstoppable force, ruling their shadow kingdom from deep within the earth, their malevolence seeping upward into the fabric of Paris. You realize now that we are not just hunting ghosts. We are walking through the architectural blueprint of true, institutionalized evil, leaving the ominous iron cache behind. You realize the unholy trinity, the high priest, the alchemist, and the Countess did more than just run a church of darkness. They created a self-sustaining system of evil, and systems, unlike men, rarely die. They simply evolve. We now follow the poisoner's path. You move into what must have been the cult's storage and preparation area, a series of tiny, carved-out cells leading off the main passage. The air here is sharper, carrying faint traces of sulfur and dried herbs, the remnants of Dante the Alchemist's work. His focus was always on transformation, the chemical version of the unjust darkness philosophy, how to cause suffering without physical violence. This is where the ancient medieval cult directly intersects with a horrifying, well-documented, true historical horror event. Centuries later, the infamous affair of the poisons that rocked the court of King Louis XIV in the 1670s. The common history tells you that figures like La Voisin Catherine Monvoisin were modern sorceresses, performing black masses for the aristocracy and selling deadly, undetectable toxins. But where did they get their ancient knowledge? They didn't invent it, they inherited it. The cult of the unjust hand, recognizing that their medieval methods were too obvious, shifted their focus from massive underground rituals to discreet, personal acts of profane justice. They realized the ultimate power was the ability to inflict slow, spiritual suffering on the corrupt elite of Paris, the slow darkness that couldn't be traced. You stop by a section of the wall that appears loose, a stack of stones that looks subtly different from the others. You give it a careful push, and a small, rectangular section swings inward, revealing a perfectly concealed wall niche. This niche contains the strange, mysterious detail that connects the 14th century to the 17th. Inside, there are 3 very old, stoppered glass vials, not crude medieval earthenware, but fine, early modern glass, clearly dating from the 17th century. They contain residue that is deep black, like heavy ink. Next to them, etched into the stone, is a diagram, a precise, small drawing of Dante the Alchemist's coiled serpent symbol, surrounded by a recipe written in a cipher that matches the annotations in the Liber Justitiae in Versi. This niche was a drop-off point, a forgotten cache of the cult's surviving legacy. The knowledge the poison formulas was literally stored here, beneath the streets, and passed down through generations of practitioners. The black residue in the vials is almost certainly the remnant of the famous succession powder, a slow-acting poison used by the 17th century poisoners that was designed to mimic natural illness. It was the ultimate weapon of unjust darkness, allowing the powerless to inflict a slow, agonizing, unjust fate on the wealthy and the powerful. You look at the vials and whisper a hushed, nervous joke to yourself. I hope they didn't leave us any snacks down here. I'm starting to think ancient Parisian cuisine might not be safe. The realization is deeply chilling. The medieval cult may have ceased its massive black masses, but its essence transformed into a terrifying, personalized tool for social destruction. The unjust darkness philosophy, that power comes from reversing the established order, found its perfect expression in poisoning the aristocracy. The Countess's descendants or pupils simply found a more subtle, effective way to perpetuate the cult's war against Parisian society. The climax arrives as you scan the ciphered recipe next to the vials. It details a key component, the use of calcified bones specifically, bones from unanointed burials ground to a fine powder and mixed with nightshade and arsenic. This confirms the link the poisoners were literally using the bones of the innocent to create their toxins, ensuring that the victim consumed not just poison, but the unjust rage of the condemned. You quickly and carefully push the secret wall panel back into place. The path of the poisoner is the ultimate example of the cult's lasting, insidious influence. They didn't need to lead a revolution. They merely needed to provide the tools for an undetectable, spiritual corruption that poisoned the highest strata of French society from the inside out. You are now standing at the very source of a political and magical conspiracy that cost thousands of lives and terrified a king. You have just closed the hidden niche, sealing away the dangerous remnants of the poisoner's path. You know the secrets of the cult spread and evolved, but now, the environment itself seems to turn against you. You decide to press forward, seeking the deepest, most sacred inner room, the true heart of the Black Mass rituals. But the passages here grow tight and treacherous. You are leaving the grand chapel structure and entering the labyrinth's trap, a section of tunnels that the cult deliberately left unmapped and confusing. This is where the panic starts to set in. The ceiling lowers drastically. You are forced to hunch over, your light scraping against the rough stone above. The passages no longer follow a straight line. They twist, turn, and fork every few steps, forcing you to choose a direction immediately. And every choice feels wrong. It is impossible to maintain a sense of direction. The air becomes heavy and hot, quickly depleting the oxygen. You can feel the cold sweat breaking out on your skin, a mixture of effort and pure, debilitating fear. The feeling of being truly lost is crushing. You tell yourself, just follow the right-hand wall, but the right-hand wall suddenly becomes the ceiling, or curves back on itself, throwing off your internal compass. You might pause, whispering a dark joke to yourself. Do you think we should leave a trail of breadcrumbs? Or is that too cliché? And the rats down here have better taste than that. This deliberate, disorienting maze connects to a profound, true historical horror event of the Parisian underground. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, after the catacombs were partially opened, numerous explorers and curious locals ventured beyond the sealed, sanctioned zones. Many, including entire groups, vanished. Their bodies were often found months or years later, miles from any known passage, sometimes with their skulls cracked from frantic attempts to break through solid rock. They died not from violence, but from entrapment and despair, a slow, claustrophobic suffocation in the labyrinth they couldn't escape. The cult merely weaponized this natural terror. You shine your light ahead, desperate for a marker, and you see the strange, mysterious detail that confirms this disorientation is intentional. Carved crudely into the stone at a junction where 4 passages meet are dozens of small, frantic arrows. But they do not guide you. If you trace them, you find that many point directly into solid rock. Some point in a complete circle, and others point back the way you just came, only to meet another arrow contradicting the instruction. They are false directional signs, designed by Dante the Alchemist to trap and break the sanity of any intruder, condemning them to wander until they simply collapsed. You stand frozen at the junction, feeling the walls press closer, the claustrophobia becoming physical pain. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to recall the map we studied, but the turns here defy geometry. This is the moment the panic peaks. You open your eyes, and suddenly you hear a sound that cuts through the desperate quiet. It's not a faint whisper, or a distant drone, or a mechanical noise. It is the distinct, sharp shook sound of a foot dragging stone in a narrow passage. Very close. It comes from the passage immediately to your left. Your heart stops. That is the sound of a physical presence. Someone or something else is in this labyrinth with you, and it knows the confusion. It knows the tunnels, and it has just stopped moving, waiting for you to make your next desperate move. The silence that follows the sound is heavier. more profound than any silence before. You instinctively press yourself against the cold, rough wall, your muscles tensed, ready to bolt. The cold, prickling fear runs like icy water down your spine. But you know that running blindly is exactly what the labyrinth is designed to punish. You have to move, but you must choose carefully. That sound, that drag of stone, was a warning. It meant you were too close to the innermost secret. You choose the darkest, narrowest path, forcing yourself through, hoping the tightness will deter whatever is waiting behind you. You must reach the final chamber before whatever is pursuing you catches up. You force yourself through the final, narrow constriction of the labyrinth's trap. The panicked memory of the foot-dragging stone pushing you forward. You scrape your shoulder painfully on the jagged rock, but the small pain is instantly forgotten as the air dramatically changes. The narrow tunnel abruptly gives way, and you step out onto a flat floor. The oppressive claustrophobia vanishes, replaced by a sudden, profound, and utterly silent stillness. You have reached the ultimate destination, the final chamber. This room is smaller than the main chapel, circular and perfectly carved, not a natural cavern, but a fully engineered space, suggesting enormous effort was expended to keep this place hidden and stable. The walls are not rough stone, but smoothed, polished black slate, reflecting your light beam in a sickly, oily sheen. The air here is freezing cold, drier than any other part of the complex, and carries a faint, persistent scent of ozone and iron, like electricity near blood. This space was consecrated, utterly dedicated to the deepest profanity of the unjust darkness. You take a shaky breath, whispering a nervous thought into the vast silence. Do you think we've reached the point of no return? Because if that dragged foot belongs to a creature guarding this spot, I'd say the exit signs are officially gone. Just kidding. Mostly. Your light is drawn immediately to the center of the chamber. There, dominating the space, is the central altar. It is not a table, but a low, black monolith of granite, perfectly flat and chillingly smooth. It's stained not with the residue of time, but with persistent dark marks that seem to have soaked into the very molecular structure of the stone. This altar is connected to the ultimate true historical horror event that often shadowed medieval heresy, the accusations of infant sacrifice, and the most extreme forms of ritualistic murder. While often fabricated by the Inquisition for political means, the sheer level of profanity needed by the unjust hand cult to invert the holy structure suggests they aimed for the most unforgivable transgression. The final chamber, Record's hint, was reserved for rituals of absolute darkness, the culmination of their philosophy of drawing power from the deepest injustice. You slowly circle the central granite slab, your steps hushed and hesitant. You see the chilling, strange, mysterious detail that defines this place. Directly above the center of the altar, carved into the slate ceiling, is a small, grotesque basin. It is carved to look precisely like an inverted, fetal skull, its smooth surface perpetually cold. From a tiny aperture at the base of this skull basin, a dark, viscous, sticky liquid drips slowly drip onto the center of the altar below, where the stain is darkest. The cult must have created a system to feed this basin from some unknown source above, keeping the altar perpetually damp with a chilling, consecrated fluid. This liquid is not water. It is the ultimate unjust darkness component, a mix of poisons and ritual fluids, consecrated by the memory of the condemned. Perhaps the same substances once held in the Black Chalice Part 8, now fed directly into the heart of the complex. The continuous dripping action is designed to be hypnotic, a slow, unending count of their unholy commitment. The climax hits you as you read the single inscription carved into the front of the altar. It's not Latin, but Old French. Written in the cult-specific cipher, Le regret éternel est notre couronne, eternal regret is our crown. This chamber was not for celebration or praise. It was a factory of spiritual pain. The eternal regret was the suffering of the innocent, the souls they believed had been unjustly abandoned by God, whose boundless sorrow they sought to channel. They brought their most potent rituals here, seeking the highest possible power from the deepest well of betrayal and agony. You are standing on the very ground where the unjust hand felt closest to their dark inversion of divinity. The air, thick with the scent of iron and ozone, feels heavy, as if the souls they summoned are still pressing close, waiting for the final rite to begin. You know that any noise now, any misplaced step, could shatter the oppressive silence and initiate a reaction you are absolutely not prepared for. You stand at the foot of the black granite central altar, watching the dark, sticky liquid drip slowly from the inverted skull basin above, drip, drip, marking the passage of centuries and the duration of their eternal regret. The cold air feels thick, pressurized, almost vibrating with unspoken malice. You are silent, waiting for the silence to break, and break it does. It doesn't begin with a sudden scream, but with an almost imperceptible shift in the environment. It is the beginning of the ghostly choir. First, you hear a faint, low hum deep in the bedrock, like the distant, slow rumble of a massive, ancient organ. The same resonant, strange acoustics we noted in the main chapel, now amplified in this final, focused space. It is a sound so low it is felt in the soles of your feet before it is heard in your ears. Then, the voices. They are not whispers, but 1,000 voices chanting a slow, deliberate, drawn-out phrase in ancient, reversed Latin. They are toneless, flat, utterly devoid of life, yet terrifyingly present. The sound seems to emerge not from a single direction, but from the polished slate walls themselves. This brings us back to the confusing academic debate regarding these chambers. The debate is simple, yet chilling. Is this sound a genuine haunting, the preserved echo of the unseen congregation trapped by the rituals? Or is this sound an engineered, acoustic phenomenon? One side argues that the sound is a psychic residue, a direct result of the unjust darkness philosophy, the trapped, rage-filled spirits of the victims, whose sorrow is amplified by the marked bones of the innocent walls. Part 7 that surround the complex. They believe the constant dripping liquid from the skull basin Part 13 is a catalyst, a medium that sustains the illusion. The other side argues that it is a masterpiece of dark medieval engineering. They suggest that the slate walls, polished and stacked with precision, act as resonators, focusing the natural wind currents from the catacombs and the micro-vibrations of the city above, and that the circular shape of the chamber is designed to force these low-frequency sounds into a specific, dizzying pattern that the human ear interprets as chanting. Regardless of the cause, the effect is undeniable. The chant swells, slow and hypnotic, a profound feeling of being surrounded by hundreds of spectral figures. their faces turned toward the altar in dark reverence. You might stop now, feeling the cold, prickling fear turning into a genuine, visceral terror, and ask yourself, did you feel the air drop 10 degrees just now? Or is it just the pure terror of my imagination working overtime? As the chanting reaches its peak, a sustained, droning note of inverted worship, you notice the strange, mysterious detail that defies all rational explanation. On the edge of the altar, left behind centuries ago, are two small, blackened tallow candles. They are unlit, wick degraded to dust. But as the sound intensifies, the wicks begin to tremble, and a tiny, spectral, blue flame seems to flicker into existence above them, lasting only a fraction of a second before vanishing, powered by nothing but the terrifying energy filling the room. This terrifying auditory experience is linked to the true historical horror event of mass religious hysteria that plagued medieval Europe. Think of the documented outbreaks of dancing mania or sudden localized possessions, where entire communities genuinely believed they were hearing the devil's music or the voices of the damned. For the unjust hand cult, this chamber was designed to induce exactly that, a mass manufactured hysteria that proved their dark power was real, binding the congregation together in shared, terrifying belief. The climax arrives. The chanting suddenly stops, cut off sharply, leaving a vacuum of silence so intense it feels like your eardrums might burst. The silence is not peaceful. It is expectant, poised, as if the unholy service has merely paused for a chilling transition. The sense of a massive, unseen congregation filling the space is overwhelming, waiting for the high priest to lift the black chalice and deliver the final, profane benediction. You realize you have just experienced a black mass, centuries too late, and you have stood in the place of the priest. You are now saturated in the very heart of the unjust darkness. You must leave, now. The silence that follows the roar of the ghostly choir is a physical shock. The transition from terror to paralyzing adrenaline. You don't wait for the next movement of the spectral mass. You turn instantly, scrambling away from the central altar and back toward the labyrinthine passages. There is no slow pace now, only survival. You are running, your light beam bouncing wildly off the polished black walls. The overwhelming feeling of the unseen congregation pressing in from behind. You stumble once, catching yourself on the smooth slate, your breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The silence is broken only by the frantic pounding of your own heart. You pray that the dragging sound we heard in the Labyrinth's Trap Part 12 is far behind you. The tunnels are suddenly a blur of cold stone and suffocating darkness. You realize that your biggest physical threat is the structure itself. This leads to the true historical horror event that now feels immediate, the constant, terrifying risk of collapse. These ancient medieval tunnels, not built for stability, are eternally prone to shifting. As you run, you hear a deep, muffled thud from somewhere distant. Followed by the sound of falling rock, a section of the quarry above is giving way. That sound pushes you harder, a terrifying final confirmation that the earth itself is trying to seal this nightmare away, with you inside it. You scramble through the winding corridors, desperately searching for the passage that leads back to the main chapel. Every shadow is a figure, every sound is a pursuit. You are driven by the absolute necessity of reaching the hidden gate, the heavy stone slab we pushed open in Part 2. That gate is the only exit from the cult's deepest sanctuary. Finally, you burst back into the larger space of the main chapel, running past the silent, judging stacks of the bones of the innocent. You pass the spot of Brother Thomas's betrayal, past the place where the Liber Justitiae in Verse was sealed. The air is slightly fresher here, carrying the promise of the non-ritual world. You reach the corridor that leads upward to the hidden door. It takes all your strength and a desperate, frantic surge of adrenaline to retrace your steps up the slick, uneven stone staircase, the one marked with the alchemist's seal. You climb blindly, pushing against the fear, knowing that whatever is following you will reach the stairs soon. You reach the top, falling against the wall where the massive stone door is set. You shine your light, searching for the mechanism, your hands slick with cold sweat. You find the small circular depression where you inserted your finger before. You push, you twist. But the door only budges a fraction of an inch. It requires immense, sustained force to move. As you brace yourself against the opposite wall to push, your light catches one final, terrifying, strange, mysterious detail. Resting on the floor, right beside the crack of the door, is a small, crude holder made of bent iron, and inside it, a tallow candle. It is not centuries old and dusty. It is lit. The wick is short, the wax is soft, and a tiny wisp of smoke curls upward, proving that someone, or something, descended here very recently, perhaps just minutes before you arrived, and is waiting. The secrets of the unjust darkness are not merely ghosts, they have living keepers. This is the ultimate climax. You are trapped between the spectral energy of the ghostly choir behind you, the threat of the shifting earth, and the undeniable presence of a living guard ahead. You use every ounce of muscle you have left, pushing against the door, the stone groaning in protest. Creak. Just like when you opened it, slowly, agonizingly. The door slides back into place, sealing the narrow gap. You turn the locking mechanism on the outside, forcing the final click of the latch. The darkness is now behind solid, ancient stone. You collapse against the wall, trembling, listening to the solid, blessed silence that now returns to the outer tunnels. The secrets of the unjust hand are once again sealed away, locked deep beneath Paris, with the horrifying knowledge locked deep inside you. Now, the frantic sounds of the chase are gone. The terrible images of the black chalice and the ghostly choir begin to soften, receding into the far, quiet corners of your mind. We are moving away from the cold, profane granite and the bone walls, ascending slowly back toward the surface. Take a deep breath now, a long, steady breath, and let your muscles relax. The fear you feel now is residual, a dull ache of memory, not the sharp, cold prickle of immediate danger. The tunnels are wider here, the air is gently warming, and the terrifying whispers of the condemned have been replaced by the distant, comforting sound of water flowing deep in the earth. You are moving back into the known world. Remember the vast, dark emptiness we navigated. The proof that beneath the glittering city of Paris, there exists a profound, organized darkness, the ultimate symbol of unjust darkness. We found the text, we saw the relics, and we heard the chant of the eternal regret. That darkness remains, sealed away, a chilling confirmation that the worst horrors are those that men willingly engineer and then patiently pass down through the generations. But the knowledge is now ours, and in knowing the secret, we have gained a measure of distance from the fear. The only thing that lingers now is the heavy silence of the miles of stone above you, protecting the living from the terror below, and protecting the dark truth from the light. Let the fear go. let the heavy darkness dissolve into the gentle, quiet thoughts of the night. You are safe. Rest now.